I'm so glad you are here joining us for this important episode about building safety for true intimacy with Jay Stringer. You guys might remember him from a previous episode that he did on unwanted sexual behaviors with his award-winning book. And I am so very glad that you have joined us for this episode today, because I don't think you're going to leave this episode the same. And I think that you are going to, like me, have a really rich experience as we talk about somebody who uses such familiar language to us here in this podcast, but also allows us to build upon what we've learned here to get some tangibility around how to build safety in our relationships. And you'll hear he and I even dialogue and put the cards on the table for some of our own deep story work that we're doing, because we're all in process. But truly, I want to encourage you to really bring a journal to this episode for some note taking, or at least the note section of your phone, because I know that for myself, the danger of seeking information and listening to a podcast without doing the work is tempting and happens sometimes. And this is one of those episodes and moments that I think that if we really let it saturate, we can take our growth to a deeper dive level. So I'm very thankful. This was one of those episodes. As soon as it was done, I was like, get this into my Google Drive. I don't want to lose this. And I'm so thankful that Jay also has research for you to take part in as well. If you'd like to be part of the body of research that he has folks validating out of NYU and even creating new tools for to get this research scientifically validated. It is going to be groundbreaking levels of sexual history information that we are using to build and to cultivate more healthy intimacy for you and your spouse out there. So I cannot wait. He's going to tell you about that on this episode today, but even more so, like I said, this is a chance for everybody here to grow a bit and to learn more about why we do what we do and how to really, in this whole month, we've been talking about sexuality, really allow ourselves to form healthy stories around what we're doing and building together, and to get some liftoff versus feeling like, why am I doing so much work? Is it worth it? And Jay just reminds us it really is worth it, and you are worth it. And as we come together compassionately and also bear compassionate witness to the work our spouses are trying to do too, I think that we leave this episode with a joy-filled, hope-filled spirit, really even more. So I'm excited for you to delve in. Just make sure if you can take some time to be part of the research on an individual or couples level, that you connect with Jay or grab everything out of the show notes. If you haven't read his previous book, Unwanted, oh my goodness, you are in for a treat and it will change your life. So I don't say that very often in this level. I do say often I'm excited and thankful, but this is something that I want you to know that is a different level. So that's why I want you to pay attention. If you have lost me, come back to me now. You are in for a beautiful journey here on today's podcast with Jay. Jay, we're so happy to have you back on the E&M pod. Thank you so much for being here with us.
Krista, thanks for having me back on. Such a joy to be here.
Oh my gosh. Well, your episode last year and your amazing book, award-winning Unwanted, has been just such a topic ever since you came. We are just excited to jump into this topic with you on sexuality. We're talking about it the whole month. You've been studying, researching it. We're just so thankful. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're up to lately in your family and yourself?
Sure. So we are in the midst of a pretty big transition. So we moved from Seattle to New York City during COVID,
Mhm.
and then we just moved again about an hour north of the city, and we're going to try and build out a property that we have to try and do more retreats and intensives up here. Also
Mhm.
have a place to write, get away. So in the midst of a transition, but also like you, in the process of writing a book. And so I don't know quite when that will be released, but my guess would be like fall 2024. And the tentative title of that is Desire. So, gonna look at my first book looked primarily at unwanted sexual behaviors like the use of porn and infidelity. But in the next book, I want to expand the notion
Mhm.
of sexual desire problems to say, a lot of times in a marriage, you can have no desire for your partner. Sometimes people can have out of control desire or sexual pain problems. So I want to really look at what are the sexual problems that couples are facing,
Mm.
and what can we learn about them instead of kind of just either hiding or turning towards contempt towards one another.
Mm. Thank you for just bringing this out to us. Before we got on, I was literally thinking, Krista, you keep putting your episodes, I guess it was my little type 1 voice going, you keep talking about all the pathology around sex. And I was like, thankfully, I've done some mini episodes around some of the positive aspects, but like, I
Hmm.
love that you're also bringing that in because we know that when we're this empty vessel, we need to be edified and also directed as to how we can connect, not just how we're disconnected. So this is very exciting.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think so many times I kind of compare it a little bit to like food poisoning, where a lot of times in
Mm,
different circles that you can run in,
yeah.
the only time that sex is ever talked about is like talking about it in terms of salmonella, and just that notion of like you will never learn to want to cook or enjoy cooking if you're just concerned about disorders all the time. And
Mhm.
so, really just want to look at, yes, there are sexual problems, but the reason why we enter them is to really get to that place of flourishing.
Oh, thank you. That is so important that we come full circle like that. And
Hmm.
I know we're going to talk today about, even a bit about that, but I want to let our listeners know a bit about the research you've been doing lately as well, because I noticed you really delve deep. I took your 40-minute questionnaire and I loved how it was interesting. Of course, I love that
Hmm.
as a type 7, but I also felt like you were really hitting on some things that I haven't seen a lot of ever
Yeah.
really seen, even lately researchers hit on. So tell us about some of the questions and whether you've gotten any results.
Sure. Thank you for taking 40 minutes out of your day to do that. So, basically, what the research is looking at is there's a lot of kind of core marital work that's out there. So, if you study like Sue Johnson, she has a book called hold me tight, and it's basically about like how do you increase attachment and connection within your partner. Or
Mhm.
you'll look at kind of some of the work of John and Julie Gottman, and they just have really great research backed scientific things to help improve your marriage. A lot of good tips, a lot of just like it's like wisdom literature of like if you want a good marriage, these are the types of things that you need to be doing. So, for example, they might talk about you need to have a 5-to-1 ratio of blessing your partner, having gratitude, enjoying them for every kind of one critique. And that's kind of what
Mhm.
the masters of relationship do.
Mhm.
Or if you read stuff from the late David Schnarch, he would take it's like a radically different approach to
Mhm.
marital therapy. And he would say, a lot of times we marry someone in order to have them reflect back to us kind of like a view of ourselves that we enjoy. So, this notion of like, I don't really know who I am, but the reason why I'm choosing my partner is I want them to desire me, even if I don't desire
Mhm.
myself. And he would say
Mhm.
that's inevitably
Mhm.
going to wreak havoc in a marriage if you have a low level of differentiation or self, and then you're expecting your partner to fill that. But then we also know so much around the world of trauma and just the work of so many great trauma
Mhm.
clinicians, and looking at adverse childhood experiences and just that notion that we all have a story that's influencing our marriage today.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then another category might be things like sex education. So the
Mhm.
average high school student will, by the time they graduate, will only receive about 18 hours of sex ed, which is just wildly inadequate to help you maneuver through the inevitable difficulties of
Mhm.
your sexual life. So,
Mhm.
the field tends to be fairly fragmented. And so part of what the research instrument is doing is I'm trying to compile all the best theories that are out there, and
Mhm.
then trying to say that the lack of integration between, family of origin, childhood trauma, emotional connection, level of differentiation, all of these things, including sex education, all need to be brought together. That these are not a la carte menu options that you get to pick or choose. If
Yeah.
you want a healthy marriage, you have to desire to heal your past wounds, you have to desire to develop a self, you have to desire how to give and receive pleasure, and you have to learn how to desire intimacy if
Mm,
you're actually going to get to not just a relational flourishing point, but a holistic life flourishing. So
mm,
very robust project. That's why it
mhm,
takes probably 40 minutes to 50 minutes to complete the survey. But
mhm,
I am so intrigued as to what we will find. So we have an individual survey, but then we also have a survey that couples can take completely anonymously. Essentially, individuals just get their own unique codes, and then their partner will take it. And we want to look at, like, how do Enneagram numbers come
mhm,
together? How do people with maybe similar or different trauma histories, how do they come together, and how does that influence the relational and sexual
mm.
difficulties that they find themselves in? So I am so excited for this project. I mean, I was definitely excited for Unwanted to see what we could find and learn from porn struggles or infidelity, but this one in many ways feels so much more robust. So if people are listening and want to take that survey, I would love to get more research respondents to
Mm.
that. So yeah,
Definitely.
so I'm super excited.
Yes, thank you. This is such foundational work. And I know our
Mhm.
listeners are very familiar with EFT and Gottman and attachment
Yes.
work, and you're just a narrative, and you're saying, guys, we can find our way together through these fields. They don't have to be divergent, and you are able to offer them. If, of course, we have to have people respond. So I'm so grateful to our audience if they will do that. And I know we'll put it in the show notes, but just to
Mhm.
remind us that there is through lines. We can find those connections. And I did love that you
Yes.
asked the Enneagram type as well, because there's going to be attachment pieces you discover there. And I'm so eager
Hmm.
to see those results. But I love that you're also taking time so that you can really navigate it well. And I know we'll talk about this in desire, but tell us a little bit about in your couples work. I know you see a lot of couples in
Hmm.
NYC. What are you seeing as some of the biggest issues in your couples? I'm so
Hmm.
curious.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would say, I mean, this could just be the niche that I'm in, but I tend to work with one couple that tends to have, or one spouse that tends to have more of an unwanted sexual behavior presentation. So they might have a porn struggle, they might have, emotional affairs on and off again, physical affairs. And then there might be one partner that seems to be on the lower end of desire. So, speaking of David Schnarch, he would talk about how in every single couple, there is going to be a high desire couple or partner and a low desire partner. And the lower
Mhm.
desire partner always determines the level of sex that the couple will have. And it's
Mm.
not that the lower desire partner is manipulative in that, it just tends to be that way. So I can't remember if I said it last time,
Mhm.
but my wife
Mhm.
is the high desire social partner in our
Mhm.
marriage. So she wants friends, she wants our house full of people all the time, and I am very low social desire. So when
Yeah.
I was getting some psychological evaluations done for my ordination,
Mm.
the psychologist said you have the lowest need of socialization of any ministerial candidate that's ever been through this denomination. And I was like, you know me so well. um, but that sense of it can play out with sex, it can play out with sex or community. And so that's a lot of times what I end up finding with a lot of the couples that I work with is one partner wants more intimacy with their partner, the other
Mhm.
one seems to want it a little bit less, and that desire discrepancy can really create just a lot of hiding and contempt. And
Mm.
so that, the one that wants more tends to, in some ways, struggle more with more secretive behaviors because they feel like they can't get their needs or their desires
Mm.
met in their marriage. And so they are much more likely to go to, just emotional affairs, pornography. And then one partner usually desires it a bit less.
Mm.
And they could have any number of things. They could have past childhood trauma and sexual
Mm.
abuse that might inhibit them from feeling free with their desire, or they might feel like they're in something of a hostage situation that if I don't offer sex to
Mhm.
my partner, then there's going to be some level of contempt or anger that I'm going to have to experience. And again, desire cannot flourish where there is contempt. And so that's usually what happens in a lot of the couples that I work with is they're saying, are we incompatible?
Yeah.
What's wrong with us? And part of the answer is like, yes, everybody is incompatible, but that's part of the gift of relationship is that we learn how to struggle. We learn how to learn and honor one another's stories and really learn how to honor and uh, extend kindness to one another.
Mm. Oh my gosh, you are speaking our language, and we are so grateful because we've been noticing, and of course, in my work with couples over the 2 decades as well, I'm noticing that, the power differential really matters, and of course, I
Mm-hmm.
see it being promoted so heavily now in modern culture from many of our seemingly best marriage researchers, and so, unfortunately, I think it decreases a lot of intimacy and safety between partners, and I'm hearing you really remind us the thread of kindness is more
Mm-hmm.
important than trying to take power over and how contempt can come into a bond when we try that. Is that something
Mm-hmm.
you try to teach your couples when they come to see you?
Hmm. Yeah, so the way that I tend to work, at least when I work with a couple, is I want to do individual work with them before I
Mm,
see them as a couple. I don't think that you have to do that. I know a lot of great marriage therapists that will just go right in, but
mhm.
I always want to get a sense of what is the story that this person is bringing into their marriage. Because if I don't have access to that, for
Yeah.
me, it's very difficult to build a bridge between how does this current desire problem or marital difficulty actually relate to something in their past. So, an example of that might be let's say this is a stereotype, but let's say there's a man who wants his wife to desire him a lot more. Well, we might find some childhood trauma in his background where he was neglected through a lot of his childhood, felt a lot of abandonment. And
Mm,
so, in that sense of getting married, part of his hope was yes, he loved her. Yes, he saw a future with her and loved her kindness. But there was also something of this uh, unspoken desire that she would begin to soothe him and find him, even in some of the hardest places in his life. And then the inevitable outcome of any marriage is that you're going to experience a lot of disappointment. But he has never worked through his story of disappointment and grief. And so then anytime there is that sense of someone who has not grieved their story, they're going to set up something of a demand on their partner to come through for them. And so
mm,
that really helps me to build the bridge of saying your spouse is not the war uh, right now. The war is actually probably far more to do with your parents, unresolved grief. And so instead of kind of battling with your spouse, how
mm,
about we go to some of the stories where you lacked good care and people that were put on earth to desire you?
mm,
What if we began to feel grief and anger for those characters instead of, you know, pointing
mhm,
your weapon at your spouse? And so
mhm,
that really allows that sense of if a man, woman can find kindness for their story, I
mm,
find that they are much more likely to extend kindness and understanding to their partner as well. And when they are living with less demand to be desired, because they actually begin to desire themselves,
mm,
uh, they don't enter into conflict in the same way because they've extended kindness to themselves,
mm.
which allows them to, extend much more kindness to their spouse. So that would be one example.
That's a great visual for all of us thinking this through with you that people are not getting the proper self care, self soothing, and they're looking for their partner to do all that for them. But I also like how you remind us that the contempt and hostility outward to them often. we don't really know this when we look at the fundamental attribution error at a very plain glance because we think, oh, we think higher of ourselves. But what you're really rooting us, and I love this for your clients who come to see you and get that individual care first, is there's often a lot of wounding that goes so deep that we're deeply looking for that partner to fill something that we have to process through first. So you're saying
Yes.
family of origin work is really important to this whole process of your partner work. And you
Yes.
mentioned somebody who desired you from the beginning. Do you mean like your parents who were put here to desire you, or do you mean your spouse who was put here to desire you?
Parents. So, like Dr. Kurt Thompson says, that we grow up looking for someone looking for us, and this
Mm,
never stops. And so that's kind of that notion of, from the time that we are born, we're looking for eyes that are there to desire us, and a lot of times that's what happens in the failure to establish a secure attachment with our parents, is that
mm,
we are looking for someone to delight in us, that sense of like, did you have a mom or a dad that would occasionally, sit on your bed in the morning and say, "I can't wait to go and do this day with
mm,
you. I have, the best day ever planned out for us. Let's go."
mhm.
And
Yeah.
so that sense of that's really what children need, is a parent that is eager to delight in them, that
Mhm.
understands their heart, that understands the things that, bring them life, and really schemes to make those things happen. But a lot of times we don't get that, and then we watch a lot of romantic comedies and see a lot of things in culture, and then we begin to think like, oh, well, my parents weren't there, but maybe this significant other will really help me feel what I feel like I'm supposed to feel in life. So that's one way that it plays out.
And so you're really aligning us with the reminders that um, don't shame yourself if you've come into
Hmm.
marriage with some of these Hollywood notations or some of these unfulfilled needs from your parents, because we know there's this long line of generational trauma perhaps before you. I can remember one of my grad school professors saying the sins of the fathers and mothers. But I
Yes.
think that you're allowing us that freedom to say, if you weren't properly nurtured with secure attachment, then how could you have brought that into your marriage?
Yes.
And that's gracious, as well as, but let's look at that. Let's uncover that a bit in a healthy environment. And I love that you're reminding couples to do that work, because I think it's
Mm.
one thing to listen to a podcast and quite another to delve into our stories. And we all get so busy. So
Yes.
hopefully people will be taking their journals out from here or contacting a helper to really delve in, because it sounds like when you are working with couples in lieu of intimacy, they're just taking on a lot of practices that are actually drawing them farther apart. Is that right?
Yes. Yep. Yeah. I mean, one example from my own marriage would be, I have, as an Enneagram 3, like
Mm,
I have to do a lot of excavation to understand. Yes, there's a lot of dignity in being a 3, but there's also, as we all know, quite a bit of shadow. So I have to attend to the stories in my childhood that
yeah.
maybe were due to the failure of my parents, but it's just also just due to growing up in a
Mm,
traumatized world. And
yeah.
so, one of my kind of core experiences would be, my dad was a minister in the Northern Virginia area, so right outside of DC.
Mm,
And it was kind of an upper middle class neighborhood, but we always had like uh, the oldest house. We didn't get things that were remodeled. We had a Dodge
mhm.
caravan with kind of the wood paneling, way after, it was probably like 10, 15 years old.
Yeah.
So a lot of my, stories growing up were just this sense of, I feel alien from the world around me. So
Mm,
why is it that other people have Nikes, but my mom took me to Payless, and I'm in gym class and my shoes begin to leave this black streak all across the gym floor. And I get called out by the PE teacher to say, you can't have those shoes in the
yeah.
gym.
Mm,
Well, that created
mm,
something of a
mm,
wound, something of a trauma. And some of people listening might be like, that's not a trauma. Like, let's talk about the Iraq War or Afghanistan.
mm,
And so part of what I would classify that is, in the field, it's known as a small t trauma. And what
mm,
Gabor Mate says is that, trauma is not just something that happens to you. Trauma is what happens inside of you in the absence of an empathetic witness. And
mm,
so For me growing up, I didn't have an empathetic witness to something as simple but also heartbreaking as that gym story. So that created this wound in me of I really need to manage my appearance. And so I need to make sure that my shoes are right. I need to make sure that eventually my words, how I sound, all these things need to be highly manicured in order to avoid a confrontation with my own shame. And so that's part of the low desire for socialization is if I just don't desire people and I
Mhm.
don't put myself in context to be around people, then I can begin to mitigate shame. So when my wife wants to have a lot of people over and we don't have 3 or 4 hours to clean, or we haven't been able to hire someone to get same day cleaning, to come into our house, there is a lot of anger of like, you should have told me this earlier. Do not have people over. Our house is a mess. And she's like, it doesn't matter. We're having people over. And that 9 year old, 10-year old boy that she married is raging inside. And so I
Yeah.
think that's really, the importance of knowing our story in the context of a marriage is that
Yeah.
yes, my wife wants me to mature a lot more, and she can kind of shame me into it, or we can also have conversations about how does a 40-year-old man,
Mm.
myself, also begin to parent that 10-year-old who's terrified of being discovered or alienated. And so it's not just that she has to soothe me, it's that she also calls me to be more differentiated and to say, is that really where you want to leave that 10-year-old, is constantly scanning the world for where he might be humiliated? Or do you want to step into kind of caring for him and establishing some strength? And
Mm. Yeah.
that's what I think is the really
Awesome.
beautiful
That's
but wildly
awesome.
disruptive work of marriage is
Yeah.
you married a story. You married a 10-year-old
Yeah.
boy. You married an 8-year-old girl. And
Yeah.
that's part of the wonder, but also the madness of marriage.
Yes, yes, and you named it well. Like these stories are everything, which is why you love to start with story. And I'm
Yes.
inspired by that because I think that we're all carrying these. And of course, being in the fear triad, I can relate. And plus, my three sister, I'm just like going through, okay, no wonder she was always the top of the class in every possible area of life. And yet,
Yes.
as a fear type, I know those stories get carried through, and it's just so funny, like,
Mhm.
we're such a hot mess sometimes, even as people doing our work, and so we have to bring in a lot of, like you said, Gabor Mate's compassionate inquiry to really
Mhm.
delve in, and that
Yes.
takes intention, and I'm grateful to every listener here,
Mhm.
but because even if we don't always do the deeper delves, we are coming here with intention to
Mm.
at least
Mhm.
even from this episode, we can start to honor our spouse's story more. And I was just thinking how last night I was dog sitting for a friend and I went and I was like, no, Wes, I've got this. He had a really tough day medically because that's his practice. And
Okay.
I came to dog sit and my daughter went to the restroom and it was just her and I sat on the porch and as a 7, I scanned everything for security. It's a farmhouse. I closed
Okay.
my eyes, check for spiders though, because I'm also doing that 6 wing thing. And then I closed my eyes for 1 second and there's a guy in the driveway leaning over, passes my Jeep, backs up, gets in the driveway, and then says, I want to pet your dogs. Can I pet your dogs? And he's like, is that a boy or a girl? And I'm like, it's a boy, but it was a girl. Just
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
upset. And I get up and I go inside and I'm just like, lock the door. And he's standing
Yeah.
outside petting both dogs for like 5 minutes. I call my husband. He comes to play the hero. And then I was just like, here's what's happening. He's like, I'm coming right now. So he comes and then he's like, you're not coming here again. And it was like his hero story of like taking
Yes.
over. But then what was so funny is he gets up super early for medical work. And I'm like, honey, did you feed the dogs this morning? He's like, I totally forgot. He's like, it's just like made me laugh. He's like, don't worry, it's okay. Don't go. And I'm like, no, we're all 4 of us gonna go. We'll be okay. And it's like these stories get so convoluted, but
Mhm.
luckily I could tell the compassionate story of he was so kind. He came last night, you know. I'm telling the stories of not safety, but I guess where I'm going with this in the grand scheme is A,
Mm.
this is our hot mess story, but B,
Yeah.
it's also a reminder to me of like sometimes, and this might be very putting my cards on the table here to say, sometimes I feel like the world isn't safe, you know?
Mhm.
So I think that sometimes needs to be processed. Like you close your eyes as a woman and you are thrown off.
Mm,
So it's
mhm.
like, you know, and then you can't expect your husband to rescue you because, like you said, uh, we want to be adults. So I think I'm
Yes.
still learning that. Like, how do I? And I
Mhm.
think I did that a bit this morning to say to him, no, I've got this. There's going to be four of us. This
Yeah.
guy's, I was like, trust me, this guy's not independently wealthy. He's at work today. We're good
Yes.
to
Yeah.
go. But like, I
Yes.
guess I
Yeah.
was asking you, like, what can we do in marriage? And this honestly is my next question that I had written is when we are in that space where we're like, I desire to grow closer to you, but
Mm,
there's these stories I carry of shame or
mhm.
fear, or in the case of a body type, being right and doing what's right. Like, how can we come together if we're just listening here and we want something to journal or to process through?
Mhm. Yeah, my mind first went to maybe I'll do two things. One would be kind of just a present day exercise, and then the other one would be more of a historical kind of bridge building. But I think a lot about Dan Siegel's window of tolerance work. And so, the image here would be, I mean, think of kind of two parallel lines. And in the middle would be the green zone. And that's when you are, it's a great day, you're breathing well, you're excited to kind of see your partner, kind of all is kind of well in your world.
Mhm.
Uh, well, we can leave that green zone and then we can go up into the red zone. And so the red zone is like where your heart begins to race, blood pressure goes up, much more of the fight or flight responses is there.
Mhm.
And that's where a lot of anger, a lot of arguments, a lot of fear begins to take place. And then on the lower end is what Siegel calls the blue zone. And that would be like the Monday morning blues. Like, I don't know how to get out of bed. I just had a major fight with my partner, or I didn't get the promotion that I wanted. And I just feel like I am blue and don't want to move. There's no purpose in my life. And so a lot of times what happens is uh, if we are in the red zone or the blue zone, we don't know how to bring ourselves back into the green zone. So there's a phrase called
Mhm.
name it to tame it, where if you
Oh.
can name your emotion, your fear, your anxiety, your depression accurately, what happens is that your prefrontal cortex will squirt oxytocin down into your limbic system, and that will begin to offer you a type of soothing just through naming the emotion accurately. So I would say that that would be a differentiated thing to do in a marriage is to say, I'm in the red zone right now. And if I'm in the red zone, I pick fights with my partner, I pick fights with my kids, I ruin things in the
Mhm.
red zone. So
Mhm.
I need in my marriage and in my family to kind of leave for like 15, 30 minutes. I need to go for a run. I need to, get in contact with nature because I need to read that I'm in the red zone and
Mhm.
then come back to my family when I'm in more of a green zone experience. Or a lot of times I'll have a rough week and just be like, I don't feel like going through what this week requires of me, and I'll just be in a blue zone. And similarly, I need to have
Mhm.
grounding processes to be able to extend kindness to myself to come back into the green zone. So what I
Yeah.
experience a lot in couples work is that a lot of times the partner might go blue
Yeah.
and then the other partner gets really anxious about like, well, if I don't pull my wife or my husband out of this depression, it's not going to be well. So the other one gets pretty frantic. And that's where I would say, like, no, both partners need to go and establish their own green zone and
Mm.
then kind of come back together. So that's what I would say, just from something that we can do in our own individuation and,
Mm.
differentiation would be to learn how to soothe your own anxiety and your own distress. Don't outsource that job to your partner because that's what will create a lot of conflict. But then I
Mm.
think the deeper work might be like, why is this particular theme? Like in the example that I just provided about having friends over.
Yeah.
Why is this something that always throws me into the red zone?
Mhm.
Well, that's something where I need to write down, like get
Yeah.
out a piece of paper and a pen
Mhm.
and write
Mhm.
down, okay, this is the experience of anxiety and
Mhm.
having a clean home. well, I wonder what my story is with regard to why my home needed to be clean. And immediately I'm thinking about my mom vacuuming all the time. And we would
Mm.
have a lot of chores, and the house needed to be presentable before we would have anyone over. So my mom is a central character with regard to that. That Jim story comes up with regard to that. And I think that's the work of marriage, is to say, like, here are the two or three themes that we fight about over and over again. It could be money, it could be sex, it could be in laws, but what is really at play here? And we might find that it has something to do with security, provision, the issue of loyalty. And then we need to go and, do our own individual work to say, here's the current story, but here are some of the past stories, and I want to build that bridge between the two. And I think if two partners are both willing to do that work, there is tremendous potential in them to flourish, because it's a sense of, now I know your story, and I'm not going to use that story as a weapon against you the next time, but I'm actually going to use the knowledge that I have of you to love. And
Mm. Mhm.
that's the key distinction. Don't do this work if you're committed to immaturity, because you'll just have more stories to weaponize. But if you can really say, we're doing this to
Mm.
excavate one another's stories with love,
Mhm.
I've never not seen a marriage dramatically improve when both of them are committed to that.
This is just gold for all of us. Thank you. Because from name it to tame it to, I think of the Enneagram instincts, and our listeners here know I play a huge, I love the instincts, because I feel
Okay.
like you named that a bit when you were talking about the social instinct and what it
Mm,
brings up for you, and that self-pret instinct in this case, and the sexual instinct, and I feel these are bigger drivers in many cases than the
mm,
types themselves, and we tend to try to do a bit of balancing work with that, like tiny baby steps.
mm.
But you saying we need the story to go with it so that our partner understands, I think is very key to the heart work versus just that head work that I was tempted to do yesterday with a head type client. And I was like, okay, we need to
Yes.
come back to the heart, because we're both navigating and investigating. And this is not a head type of space, that what we're talking about here with desire. And so
Hmm.
thank you for just inviting us all to like see what's the story in our hearts about these pieces, and even just
Yeah.
giving that compassion to each other versus this sequestering or positioning ourselves as enemies. Because I think when there's that hero villain, we're losing
Yep.
our ground very quickly. Like you said, no one's going to want to tell that story when our verbals or nonverbals are hostile. So if you're wondering and listening,
Well
like,
said.
how do I navigate desire? I think you're telling us, make sure you guys stay with the richness of the interior. Don't just look at it at face value sometimes.
Yeah. And that, I mean, that goes back to, the book that I'm writing and researching.
Mm.
Is I really think all of these things need to be done together, where it's like, I know a lot of people that get into narrative work and then kind of
Mhm.
use their narrative to excuse developing intimacy, because it's
Yeah.
just like, well, this is my
Yeah.
story. And then they
Yeah.
use their story as an excuse to not develop a self. Or
Mhm.
people that are like very committed to, emotionally focused work, and they just want a secure attachment in their marriage, but they've never done the story work to understand why
Mhm.
they have turned this desire for secure attachment into a demand within
Mhm.
their marriage. And that's where, emotionally focused work can be weaponized if you're not doing that
Mm.
story work. Or,
Mhm.
a lot of times people
Yeah.
will read all the best sex education out there to try and improve their sex life. But if they
Mhm.
don't have a sense of how to develop intimacy or their story, they're going to be using that to evade kind of some of the harder and more difficult work. And so I think that's where marriage is just this crucible that corners us to say, you've got to do all the work.
Yeah.
And it's hard work, but it's also glorious work if you can
Mhm.
enter your story and learn how to make a relationship thrive in the
Mm.
midst of your
Mhm.
marriage.
Yeah, that is really cool. And it's beautiful to reap the results of that, to be able to say, and I know myself, I do it really well some days I don't. But to be able to know how to navigate these spaces, I think is very powerful and key and it brings a lot of safety. And I do think that's
Hmm.
like we're saying today, like such a precursor for true deep intimacy is that
Yes.
safety. But then like you're going to be adding, and we can't wait to have you back when you talk through your next book, because it's really going to be a nice stepping stone for even deeper desires together. But I think we're
Hmm.
establishing some foundation here. And I know with Wes being a social subtype, when we were both dysregulated yesterday, it was interesting because I saw it, and I'm just the one who is more self-pres. And so I was like, oh gosh, he is a hot mess after work. And I knew he had a lot of
Hmm.
difficult patients. And I knew in his type 1, he wasn't valued the way he probably needed to be. And he's not a 3 or an 8, which Trudy just shared, and I'll have that podcast cast soon. I
Hmm.
haven't shared it yet, but this is a group that really can navigate for themselves in the workforce. And so I'm like, he's not there, but I don't have it to give either, because I also had a long day with clients and my kids. So I sent my 2 kids who are social and very healthy in that space to go navigate. And I thought that was a beautiful part of family work,
Hmm.
that I was like, those 2 would be great. My 9 doesn't need his stress right now. Of course, then we had our own stress at that house. But like it was like our way of saying the story I'm going to tell myself is my spouse is really overworked and he needs to be regulated some himself, and he needs to
Yeah.
find that self-pres, and we're working on that together. But some of it
Hmm.
is he finds, like, I noticed you use the language of we need to go to ourselves. And for Wes, that language is still scary after such severe trauma.
Hmm.
And he has done some good work and continues to, but it was like I got to really put that together with he is a social wiring. And when he was a child and his parents were drugging, he was able to find safety in
Hmm.
groups. But I'm like, I don't have it to give. And so,
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess we're just learning all together about the ways to navigate this. But you're really making our brains think so hard today on every level, and
Hmm.
I'm just so
Yeah.
grateful, Jay.
But what you're saying is like, I mean, that's all story, right? So like
Yeah.
if he had druggy parents, there's a lot of crises that he is seeing. So that sense of when you need
Mhm.
a rescue, I mean, he
Mhm.
has been
Yeah.
neurologically
Oh my God.
hardwired for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But for a lot
Mhm.
of it, and you included, like when you're
Mhm.
scanning, like I know what my kids need, I know what he might need, but then
Mhm.
to be able to still find like this is what would be good for me to have safety. I mean, you had to do a lot of work to be able to know I'm
Mhm.
going to make a request of something that I really need, which I think that's where the beauty is that you were
Mhm.
able to scan your environment and kind of get a
Mhm.
sense of there was a lot of reasons to not call for help because you can naturally get a sense of what other people's needs
Mhm.
expectations are, but you knew that and you continued to press into like no, I need to honor what it is that I need right now even given
Mhm.
all of
Mhm.
the situations. So
Right.
I think that's the good work of marriage is to say, yeah,
Yeah.
why am I really good in crises? But then in kind
Yeah.
of normal feed the dog moments, I'm not necessarily aware of it. And that's
That is
fine.
so
That's when you look at any of our professions of like
yeah.
why I'm a therapist, why you're a
Yeah.
therapist,
Yeah.
why
Yeah.
your husband is a doctor. It's like we grew up knowing how to anticipate needs and crises, and that's a lot of the helping professions is we have a lot of unaddressed trauma, and we can find our identity through being good in the midst of
Mhm.
crisis and difficulty, but
Mhm.
often very very difficult for people in the helping professions to know themselves, which is I know very ironic.
Well, that's a good portion of our listenership here, and there's a lot of pastors
Yeah.
listening, and
Hmm.
people who maybe are burnt out, used to be pastors, are no longer pastors, but trying to find their way spiritually. And it's just such a
Yes.
life-giving invitation when you say, keep looking for your story, keep trying to find each other. Don't give up. It's a worthy, glorious space to be able
Hmm.
to just meet sometimes there, and so much more worthy than just completely staying away in that self-pres hole that sometimes seems so amazing and inviting, but really ultimately leaves us in the shadows forever if we don't come back. So,
Yeah.
but I'm grateful personally that you're reminding us it is okay to go away for a little while. That's very healing too. So,
Yes.
Jay, tell us
Yeah.
where we can find this research and just more about your work. I know our listeners already love you, but for the new ones who don't know about you yet, tell us.
So my website is jay-stringer.com. There's another British crime fiction author that has
Mm.
jaystringer.com. So that's not me.
Okay.
Also on Instagram occasionally, but maybe in your show notes you can add, if someone wants to take the research, we can get couples the anonymous survey if people are willing to take it. But
Yeah.
Instagram or website are the place to learn about intensives that I offer for couples
Mhm.
and
Hmm.
other resources, books, and kind of, yeah,
Okay.
that's where they can find me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. We are so glad. I know this is going to be a repeat episode for a lot of people. So thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Mhm. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you for staying here with us, maybe even through some uncomfortable moments as you process one of our stories or as you're thinking more likely about one of yours. And I hope that you will get that helper or coach if you need somebody who is gifted in the realm of sexuality, or that you will take some time, as Jay said, to truly just get that piece of paper out and write out what's making you feel not regulated, making you feel unsafe, so that you can truly help yourself to find your way back to healthy intimacy in your spouse. So, lots to take in. Feel free to make this one of those episodes that you re listen to, that you share with your spouse. And we will talk to you soon. Grab everything in the show notes. And thanks, guys, so much for this journey. Love doing it with you. Bye bye.